Bonjour, Itwayan Katakandijakas, Mangan Dodem, Mantus Agigan Donjaba, Espino and Daya, Michifisquaya on thou. The last keynote speech I give, the reason why I want this to be the last, and I say it respectfully, is because I grew up in Métis and non-status Indian politics. I have been in conferences such as this since I've been a small girl, perhaps even while I was still in my mother's belly. I've heard talks, I've heard the hope, I've heard promises of change. I myself have been inspired at conferences, and perhaps those were in my naive days, when I didn't know now, when I didn't know then what I know now, and that is what is happening to the earth. Warning, this story ends with a revolution. We've heard a lot about reconciliation in the past couple of years, and I wanted to comment briefly that I think it's tied to what I want to say this evening, which is politically that I see the word reconciliation being used to rebrand existing insidious assimilationist policies of the government. Reconciliation is neither comfortable nor convenient, and it shouldn't be. Reconciliation without land returned and a correction of all that has resulted from our dispossession is not even possible. We, Indigenous peoples and our ancestors, have endured 400 years of genocide, murder, dispossession, the theft of our lands, oppression, colonialism, racism, thousands of children stolen, a total breakdown of families and communities, forced assimilation, sterilization, sickening medical experiments, torture on Indigenous children. Our languages are now in a state of national emergency. We continue to be murdered. Our children continue to be stolen by the thousands, assimilated into educational systems that are enshrined into Canadian law, and we suffer debilitating poverty. And we must endure the expressions, the pompous expressions of a superiority by the dominant society at every turn. Everything that has been thrown at us was intended to wipe us off the earth as recognizable, sovereign, distinct nations. It's astounding to me that we are still willing to even sit down and talk about reconciliation. What a peaceful, dignified, and beautiful people Indigenous people are, that we have taken all of this and are still willing to share. Sharing and generosity are at the core of our values. Sharing, giving, and generosity is a core central tenet of my life, and it's tied to love, respect, and compassion. It's tied to justice. And although it may seem like I go off course with this evening's talk, keep in mind this central value as we move together this evening. Indigenous peoples have generosity built into our DNA because it's understood that our lives are only possible because of the generosity of Mother Earth and other living beings. Our traditional spirituality comes from the earth. My people come from Lac St. Anne, the original name Manituzag-Egan. It's called Spirit Lake. My people, the Michif people of Manituzag-Egan, are buffalo, moose, and fish people, and we share this with other Indigenous nations. Before colonialism shattered our communities and dispossessed us from our lands, we relied on the buffalo for almost everything. We recognized the buffalo as a nation. They were 90 million strong, as we were, before their genocide occurred. They were annihilated because of the Europeans' hatred of us. We have songs for the buffalo. There are buffalo ceremonies. They hold the doorway in our sacred lodges. We have creation stories of them. Our lives were lived on the land with them and entirely with the rhythms of the earth. We traveled freely as they did. The buffalo gave us everything, and I'm alive today because of them. Sharing, giving, and generosity, as I said, is in the DNA of our people. Our entire worldview and existence was based on the concept of living in balance with all of creation. We understood then, as we do now, that there are powerful spirits that exist in everything, and we are at the mercy of them. The waters are viewed as the lifeblood of Mother Earth. so highly regarded that certain lakes were considered off limits except only to grandmothers who would go harvest medicines there. Our original place names hold many of these teachings about the land. Our relationships to the spirits are ones that are marked by extreme gratitude, humbleness, and respect. Our relationship also with the animals, insects, fish, and birds are ones of gratitude and respect. We know that we are at the bottom of the food chain, not the top, and we need everything, and nothing needs us to survive. Our entire governance structures were based on animals, spirits, and the earth. We knew that all human beings are spirits as well, that we are in fact all one. The air you breathe is my breath. The water I drink is part of you. Chief Seattle once said, "Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. All things share the same breath. The beast, the tree, the man, the air shares its spirit with all life that it supports." We believe, and we still believe, we believed and still believe, that all healing comes from the earth. The plants not only have healing powers, but they communicate with us. They can carry sickness away. They are generous and kind, and they never stop giving to this earth and all life on earth. My great auntie, my Kokum sister, told me about her mom using a poplar tree and a hair from the head of her brother to cure an abscessed tooth. Now, skeptics and Western medicine will say that this isn't possible, but we live in a world where this guy is possible, and we share the earth with him, and her, and this guy, and this mom, and this one, and this guy. Where this plant exists, where butterflies begin with an egg the size of a poppy seed, grow and break free, then weave their own cocoons and shed their old skin, and wings emerge. We live on a big, giant ball of water, floating in outer space, circling a giant ball of fire. If this is possible, then anything is possible. So how did we get to this point? I want to talk about land, because land is the most important thing that is overlooked when we talk about things like reconciliation or nation to nation. The return of stolen lands and the respect for Indigenous nations to set up their own sovereign and autonomous governance structures using Indigenous law is not on the table. I do not believe that Canadian law is superior to our own. The imposition of Canadian law onto our nations is a continued affront to our existence as self-determining peoples. I want Canadians to begin to grapple with this, as uncomfortable as it may be, to reconcile themselves to the hard truth so that they can begin to let go of the crown lands they have claimed as their own. This is a map produced by the Government of Canada. It says on this map that there are 0.2% of all Canadian landmass, they say, is Indian reserves. But when you look at the Indian Act, it says in the Act that the land is owned by the Queen and her heirs forever, set aside for, quote unquote, the use of the Indians. This means actually that 0% of our land is in our control, according to Canadian law, 0%. Which people do you think around the world would ever agree to hand over 100% of all of their ancestral land to another people who have come from somewhere else? No one. Canada represents the largest land heist, the largest land theft in the history of the world. And it's not just Canada, of course. We know it's North America, Australia. It extends to wherever the British Empire and other European countries colonized the world in their mad dash for riches and resources. And we need to talk about why we were pushed off our lands. We need to talk about resource extraction. And I find it very odd that I'm sitting in a place that's celebrating mining while we talk about this. We need to understand that the reason why we were dispossessed of our lands was for the resources. When we think about what was happening in Europe at the time when Europeans first came here, there were power struggles going on between European countries and monarchies. And the rulers needed the wealth from the other countries that they colonized in order to fortify their own coffers to pay for armies to protect them from invasion from other countries and monarchies. Because they had to pay their armies at that time. And if the monarchies didn't have enough money to pay them, they would be overtaken by another one. So they were constantly on the hunt for riches. And so there was this massive resource grab as these ships set out, funded by their country's rulers. It was not to settle, so we can't call them settlers, nor can we call them explorers. They were exploiters. It was a massive quest to bring riches back to their country. It was pure greed, and it turned into what we know today. What we have now is a series of treaties that was from the beginning not honorable on their part. Transcript after transcript and historical record supports this. The Europeans never did see us as equals or respect us as nations. They always considered us inferior. In the British Parliament after the 7 Years' War, a British member of Parliament was speaking about the English and French on the continent. And he said, "Here is a contest between two equals, about a country where both claim an undivided right. And I think it's allowed on both sides that the natives have no rights at all, that the treaties were fraudulent, and that they were entered into on the part of one party with devious intentions, at a time when people were starving and under duress." I want to talk about the spirit and intent for a minute, and this idea that we are all treaty people, because we know that our intent was honorable. But what was the intent of the British? The intent was to obtain the lands for resources. That's it. And none of that has changed. It's still going on today. You can't look at the spirit and intent without examining the spirit and intent of the other treaty partner and calling it what it is. They are fraudulent documents that still need to be amended to include the Indigenous perspective that is wholly absent from them. Doing that will shake the validity of Canada to the core of its foundations. We still occupied our lands and were present on the land and still practicing our ceremonies when the residential schools were put into place. And we all know the reserves were put into place, they thought, as temporary until Indigenous people could be assimilated and disappear as nations. So as you see, the spirit of the earth and the land I spoke about before is central to our understanding of the world and our well-being as Indigenous peoples. Land and resources, although I don't call them resources, are also the central reason for our dispossession and all that followed, including residential schools. The loss of land and control is still today what keeps us impoverished and literally being murdered and killing ourselves in the crisis of suicide. So therefore, land is the foundation of everything for us now and into the future. And because you are all academics or educators, I want to pivot for a moment to education. I know you're here because you're committed and willing and seeking solutions for change. I know you're here with good hearts, and I thank you for being brave enough to listen to some of the things that I'm saying that might be uncomfortable. And I know some of you are probably nodding your head saying, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that you in positions as educators have so much power to actually change things. You literally have the future of this country in your hands, especially if you go into education where you're teaching children. You, more than anyone, can set a course for the future that can completely turn things around. I'm not one to sugarcoat things on a matter of life and death for our people, and so I will be frank. The education system is failing Indigenous children. It is failing Indigenous people. But not only that, it is failing Canadians on a massive scale. It's failing Canadians in part because it's killing Indigenous languages. To quote the Briar Patch article on linguicide, Canadians are probably aware that linguicide was a central and overt policy of residential schools throughout Canada. There is little excuse for Canada to continue to deny First Nations children the right to publicly funded education taught in their mother tongue. And it means that we have to literally struggle to set up language houses and have our kids run down highways just to be able to fund them. And many will say, you know, things are so much better than they were 20 years ago. And sure, that may be true. But the reality is we are simply out of time. We don't have the luxury of incremental steps any longer. I have yet to see one example of a child emerging from a public school system as a fluent speaker of an Indigenous language. The public school system is taking up space and it's strangulating our languages, albeit unintentionally. I also want to talk about how the educational system is failing Indigenous kids and Canadian children. The late Wilfrid Pelche from Wikwemicong was way ahead of his time. He was a brilliant orator, a traditional knowledge keeper, a thinker, mentor, and we're lucky to still have some of his writings with us. In his paper, Education for Survival, he talks about the imbalance of the current educational system and how it's creating what he termed crippled human beings. He once said at a conference much like this that the educational system is killing our kids in the cradle. And what he meant was that the system itself conditions children's minds away from free thinking. Let me explain a bit. The way that Indigenous children were taught before they were put into school systems is that children were observed by the elders. The elders would notice gifts or skills of children, and they would be encouraged by individuals to fully embrace their unique gifts with a mind of being responsible to and contributing to the whole community or society. They would be apprenticed by elders so that they could master these gifts of lifelong learning. And I think that's what Wilfrid was getting at. What this system does to all children is it programs them from the time they enter to the time they leave to be obedient. And I know that to be true because I went to school. With schedules and bells and structures. It's set up with the teacher at the head of the class who knows everything, and it's implied that students know nothing. Wilfrid also said the system fails children by creating hierarchies, by funneling all children through the same set of expectations, where those who get the highest grades who don't get the highest grades begin to feel inadequate beside those who do get higher grades. And he said, but even worse than that, the feelings of inadequacy are the feelings of superiority that the people who do get the highest grades begin to feel over top of the people who don't. Wilfrid was talking about the way our entire species have come to believe. Our belief systems have promoted the idea that greed is success, that the accumulation of individual wealth is success. And this has created a lopsided and imbalanced species, our species, who justifies violence to our planet and to others as being okay because of these beliefs. Our entire world as we know it today holds up the concepts of individual rights over the collective, or the rights of animals and waters to exist in health and well-being, under the belief that the accumulation of individual wealth under capitalism branded as democracy leads to a better life for all. It is this belief system, and ones that we've been conditioned to believe, that is destroying this world. The concepts of individual right to take up and the right to take without giving has set the world on the course for destruction. Everywhere we look, this planet is being covered by garbage and radioactive waste, and the waters are being polluted everywhere because of this belief system. There are 16 nuclear power plants and more nuclear uranium sites sitting around the Great Lakes. There are over 1,000 oil spills a year in Canada from pipelines, and nobody raises an eyebrow. There's a 65-year-old pipeline called Line 5 sitting under the Straits of Mackinac right now with a 50-year shelf life, It's 15 years over its shelf life, pumping millions of liters of oils a day through it. And there is not even a massive outcry. The NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, is pushing to bury nuclear waste in the Great Lakes watershed region, just north of Elliott Lake. And all of Canada is not even up in arms about it. Entire ecosystems that took millions of years to form and help sustain the planet can be destroyed in minutes, so a few humans can profit and live in luxury. And where people can document cancers and tumors and deformities in fish and not say anything as the government dismisses it as anomalies. Where 90% of all seabirds have plastic in their guts and human beings are not completely freaked out. Where baby chicks are purposely hatched, and then 50% of them are simply thrown in the garbage to be crushed because they were born males. And there isn't a massive outcry by anyone, save for a few people. There are consequences for this. Our traditional laws tell us that we are breaking sacred law. There are consequences to our species for this, and all species on the earth. We human beings must change our way of thinking away from greed. And this comes back to what I first spoke about. The central core and antidote to greed itself is giving. As Indigenous peoples, we inherently understand this. And this understanding is where the hope lies. We are spirits here, surrounded by spirits everywhere. This planet and this life leaves me in utter awe and a state of constant gratitude to the animals, the earth, and the waters. What we are doing to Mother Earth is reprehensible. Reconciliation for me, then, is not limited to an idea of us all getting along as we kill this planet together. Reconciliation must begin with the animals and the waters. It must begin with us as human beings asking for forgiveness and deciding together that we will set a new course based on respect and sharing so that all living beings can be healthy and thrive. We have come to a tipping point where the earth is simply not able to sustain our insatiable greed and belief in individual rights. We must shift our thinking to have responsibility rather than rights. We are all going to go down the same path together of immense suffering if we don't all become activists to take control. We, the people, have the power to change things. And unfortunately, we've entered a new era. And there's been a shift in the most recent while. And this is a new era of water. All around the world, we are witnessing the rise of what is to be a water revolution by the people. Regular people who want nothing more than to have clean water for their children and a clean world for the next generations. And we are also witnessing the lengths to which corporations and governments will go to protect corporate interests over the health and well-being of citizens they purport to represent or protect. In Elsipogtog, this is what the people, regular people like you and me, faced when they tried to stop a Texas fracking company from coming into their territory. In Standing Rock, people armed with nothing but prayer and songs faced this. Their own country and state police forces with fully militarized gear, sound cannons, and live weaponry. Standing in water, singing and praying to protect the very river that they live off of, from the pipeline. The people were shot at close range with rubber bullets, sprayed without mercy with tear gas. The company was able to continue a mile off from where this was happening, to continue to work on the pipeline, to protect the interests of the shareholders in the corporations, the police are being engaged against us. And if they come to poison the waters here, we cannot be mistaken to think that we will not face this kind of terror from the state towards us if we try and protect the waters. This is happening all around the world. We are witnessing mothers trying to stand up for babies and the next generations. We are witnessing the atrocities of crimes committed against the people supported by technological advances in warfare equipment used against us rather than to support and protect us. Corporate greed is winning. We the people, the regular people, have been declared the enemies of the state, where the economy is a ruthless king. We are unprotected now, and we could no longer look to the state to protect the interests of the people. And we have to know that this is only going to get worse for our children and our grandchildren and the next generations. I want to share with you a dream that I had, and it guides me to this day, and I wish that I didn't understand some things. But in this dream, there was a fire raging across a hilltop, and the fire was reaching new forested areas, and the spirits of the trees, standing 60 stories tall, rose up out of the trees and began to walk away from the fire. And this painting is called Tree Spirits Leaving Before the Fire. On the side of the river where I was standing, there was a large gathering of about a couple hundred people. And an old medicine man told us to watch across the river and watch the spirits walk. And then some jeeps and vehicles came rushing in. It was our people, wearing camouflage, and they were retreating in battle and about to face death. They were environmental warriors, and they were fighting for the earth. This dream was 20 years ago that I had that. And the old man took his pipe and he began to walk into the bush, and the people began to follow. More than ever, our children need to know the power of the serpent. They need to know our sacred lodges and our ceremonies. The next generations need to know the powers of the animals and the sun and the moon that exists as our governance. They need to speak our languages that contain the wisdom of this great mystery that we live in. Our kids need to know that Sabe is not a myth, that the rocks can open up, and that the little people carry medicine. Our children need to know the spirits of this earth. They need to understand the spirits of the water, the offerings and the ceremonies that we have to make to them, which even after a lifetime of study can never be mastered. They need to be taught on the land. Our children need to become masters and scholars in natural laws, laws laid down by Nana Bojo. They need to believe in the mystery and the magic that exists all around us, to believe and to know. Our children need to know and believe that thunderbirds are real. The only education that we need our children to learn from is from the land. And you, as educators and academics, and more importantly as human beings, can do more than you know. You must have the courage to disrupt the system for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. You must have the courage to join with each other, to turn the system onto its head and rebuild so that schools are not institutions, but go back to the natural state of bringing children to the land full-time, and mentorship so that they can develop their gifts and be, as Wilfred said, free thinkers. Because it will be the children of today who are free thinkers if we allow them to be, who will be able to find the solutions that we're not capable of because of our own conditioning and colonization. So, What we need is a revolution. We need a revolution of the mind. We need a revolution of our actions, a revolution of language revitalization. And it need not be violent. It can be as gentle as a grandmother deciding to carry a pail of water around to begin an entire movement and reinvigorate the ceremonies in our minds towards protecting the water, as Josephine Mandaman has done. We don't need to bring indigeneity into universities. We need to bring ourselves, our indigenous selves, out onto the lands, to rebuild our ways of learning, to keep this earth and the waters pure and beautiful for 10,000 more years. We need a revolution that will turn our lands into our control and stop the waters from being polluted. We need to have our children fully immersed in our languages and spirituality and ceremonies, not part-time, full-time. Now, I wish I didn't know the things that I knew. I wish I could just kick back like this cat right there, or like this one right there. Now that would be awesome. We are in sacred times. We are in a spiritual battle for this earth. We need a revolution of people who are willing to follow the pipe, not halfway. The earth needs us and the future generations need us, and we're out of time for the waters. So I apologize if this was not the keynote you thought you would get. Like I said, I hope that this will be my last keynote speech ever, because I want to spend all of my time from here on in, on the land, building the culture camp forever so that we can do exactly what I've said that we want to do. And if we took all of our energy, you know, how many conferences are we going to go to? How many thousands of dollars are we going to spend doing this? I was raised like this, so I'm not criticizing anybody here. I understand. But we really need something different now. The revolution has begun. We need each and every one of you to write and sing and dance and block roads and protest and quilt and love and make babies and organize and do whatever you can. Put 100% of yourself into this and into protecting the waters, because all of us are needed. We are all being called to stand up. And this is why we were born in this crazy time. Why every one of you and me is alive on the planet right now in this really, really messed up, crazy time. So don't give up. Don't give in. And fight for what you believe in. All good stories end in a revolution. Miigwech.